The first time you see it, your brain rejects it before it understands it. A veil so thin it seems to hold breath, folds that sag like fabric, a face pressed gently beneath as if marble could yield the way skin does. And for a second, you don't think sculpture, you think imposter, something made to look like stone, labeled as stone because no one expects to argue with a museum. That moment is the trap, because it's exactly the moment bad history feeds on. If it feels impossible, it must be forbidden knowledge. I started in a more ordinary place. Tool marks, workshop practices, the slow logic of carving, how a chisel translates a sketch into a surface you can touch. Then a photo stopped me cold. A veiled figure lit from the side, the veil catching light as if it were translucent. Not metaphorically, not looks like. Translucent enough to make you reach for a physical explanation. And once you notice one, you notice how often the same illusion appears. Naples, Rome, Milan, Vienna, St. Petersburg. Different decades, different patrons, same quiet provocation. The most famous is the Veiled Christ in Naples, finished in the 1750s. You're told it's a single block of marble, and the shroud is part of that block. No separate layer, no added material. Just stone made to behave like cloth. The easy response is to declare it impossible. Marble fractures, it has veins. Work it too thin and it chips, snaps, fails. That's true in general. But in general is where most misunderstandings begin. Marble isn't one uniform substance. Some varieties are finer grained and more homogeneous. Some are tougher in thin sections. And what looks like 2 millimeters everywhere in photos is rarely 2 millimeters everywhere in reality. A veil can be thick where it needs strength and razor thin only at edges, ridges, and raised folds where light hits best and your eye does the rest. That's the first hidden mechanism. The veil isn't uniformly thin, it's strategically thin. The second mechanism is even more deceptive. Translucency is not only thickness, it's also surface finish and lighting. Polished marble can scatter light through a shallow layer. Under raking light, light that skims the surface, the topography becomes louder. Under backlighting, the thinnest regions glow. A sculptor who understands how marble handles light can create translucence without making the stone structurally suicidal. This is where the official explanation usually fails the audience. It says masterful artistry and stops as if that's an answer instead of a compliment. The real question is process. How did they do it without breaking it? The answer is less mystical and more brutal. They carved to the edge of failure, and they accepted that failure was part of the workshop. We don't see the broken blocks. We see the survivors. We see the finished masterpiece, not the pile of discarded attempts that never left the studio. That's not a conspiracy. That's selection. Every craft that looks miraculous looks that way, partly because you never meet the mistakes. But there's a third layer that makes the impossible veil feel like more than technique. Many of these works appear in a relatively tight window. The veiled busts and figures of the 18th and early 19th centuries become a recognizable genre. The talent seems concentrated, and then it fades. If it was so revolutionary, why didn't everyone do it forever? Because the market changed. Veiled sculpture is not a neutral display of skill. It is a message. It's a demonstration piece. Look what I can do. Look how far I can push stone. It flourishes where patrons pay for virtuosity and where workshops compete for prestige. Naples is a perfect setting for that. Aristocratic patronage, religious commissions, and a culture that valued theatrical realism in sacred art. When patronage patterns shift, when money moves, when tastes change, when academies standardize what counts as proper, a fragile genre can fall out of favor. Not because the method vanishes overnight, but because the incentive does. That point matters because it's exactly where the seductive myth enters. It appeared suddenly, disappeared suddenly, therefore the technique was lost or suppressed. It's a lazy leap. Styles disappear all the time without being banned. The harder work is to ask what replaced them. In the 19th century, sculpture became more institutional. Academies rewarded certain ideals: anatomy, classical restraint, polished finishes. Meanwhile, new industrial materials and casting methods made other forms of ornament cheaper and faster. The same era that could still carve marble virtuoso pieces also found it economically rational to use plaster models and reproduce work in different media. When the goal shifts from singular marvels to scalable production, the miracle becomes uneconomical. Now, none of that denies the feeling you get in front of these statues. The veil still looks wrong, so let's put the feeling to a sharper test. If these veils were chemically softened stone, as some internet legends insist, we would expect a few telltales. We would expect irregular penetration of a reagent, changes in crystal structure detectable across the surface, inconsistencies in hardness, or residues in pores. Museums and conservators handle these objects constantly. They X-ray them, they clean them, they stabilize microcracks. If there were a reliable signature of stone made plastic, it would not remain a whispered secret. It would be an entire subfield of conservation science. Instead, what you find in serious conservation work is something less sensational and more convincing. Tool marks in areas you don't see in postcard photos, careful finishing stages, evidence of abrasion and polishing, repairs and restorations, and a deep understanding of how stone behaves. The myth persists for one reason: it flatters the viewer. It says your instinctive shock is proof that you've seen through history, but your shock is doing something else. It's recognizing a mismatch between modern expectations and older mastery. We are used to calling power tools advanced and hand tools primitive. In sculpture, that assumption is backwards. A modern CNC can remove material quickly, but it can't make aesthetic decisions. It can't decide where a veil should thicken to survive and where it should thin to glow. It can't make the micro choices that trick the eye while keeping the structure intact. A master with simple tools can outperform a machine, not because the tools are better, but because the intelligence is closer to the material. And the 18th century produced specialists who lived inside that intelligence. They had workshops, apprentices, and long traditions of stone finishing. They also had something we rarely mention: time. A patron paying for a marvel wasn't buying speed. They were buying obsession. Still, there's another set of objects that complicate the story, and they deserve separate attention. Architectural ornament in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Facades covered in repeating motifs, delicate leaves, saints, shields, scrollwork, sometimes so consistent that it looks molded rather than carved. Here, the conspiracy instinct gets it exactly wrong by accident. The ornament often was molded, just not by softening stone. Cities like New York, Chicago, Budapest, and Vienna were built in an era of mass production of architectural skin, terracotta, plaster, cast stone, and prefabricated elements made from molds. That's why repeated details can match perfectly. It's not a secret lost chemistry, it's industrial manufacturing, an industry that was enormous and then declined when styles changed and maintenance costs became unpopular. If you want the real mystery of that period, it isn't how did they do it? It's why did we stop choosing it? Why did ornament become a liability? Why did we decide that complexity is wasteful, that durability is optional, that buildings are disposable? The most honest answer is economic. Hand-carved ornament is expensive. Mass-produced ornament still requires maintenance. After the World Wars, budgets hardened. Modernism sold a moral story. Clean lines, honesty of materials, efficiency. Some of it was aesthetic conviction. Much of it was cost. And then there's demolition, the quiet end of so many buildings that once wore that level of craft. When a city tears down a station, a bank, a hall, it rarely preserves the logic of how it was made. It preserves the land value. The craft disappears not through suppression, but through neglect and replacement. Knowledge doesn't need to be erased to vanish. It only needs to stop paying rent. So what are these veils really? They are not evidence of an ancient global civilization hiding behind museum labels. They are evidence of something more uncomfortable, that skill can peak and that modernity doesn't automatically inherit it, that we can have better machines and still choose worse outcomes, that a culture can decide quietly without a meeting, without a ban, that certain kind of mastery are no longer worth funding. The veiled statues endure because they don't just imitate cloth, they imitate certainty. They make stone look obedient. And when you stand in front of them long enough, the question shifts. Not what did they hide from us, but what did we stop valuing? Because the veil isn't only on the sculpture, it's on our imagination. We look at a masterpiece and assume it must be impossible because accepting that it was achieved by patience, risk, and human judgment forces a harder admission. We could pursue that level of craft again if we wanted to pay for it, train for it, and wait for it. And that is the part history rarely says out loud. We didn't lose magic, we lost appetite,